As we told you at the top of the show, actor Rock Hudson has AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Groups such as the National Gay Task Force are hoping the actor's high visibility will promote new understanding of this disease, just as President Reagan's cancer focused new attention on colorectal cancer. The news of Hudson's illness was revealed in Paris Thursday. CNN's Don Lennox has more.
The confusion surrounding the condition of Rock Hudson has at least in part been explained. Thursday in Paris, where Hudson has been hospitalized at the Pasteur Institute of the American Hospital, his press spokesman confirmed to reporters what had been rumored, that the 59-year-old star does have AIDS.
Mr. Rock Hudson has acquired immune deficiency syndrome.
That statement, however, wasn't without confusion of its own. Collard said Hudson's condition was improving daily and that he had been cured of AIDS. Later, however, she retracted that statement, saying it was her misinterpretation. She said Hudson does still have the disease. Collard said that Hudson had known about his illness for more than a year after being diagnosed by doctors in California. It was those doctors who had suggested he go back to Paris. Doctors there discovered Hudson is also suffering from an unspecified liver ailment, which earlier had been reported to be inoperable cancer. Doctors are waiting for Hudson's condition to improve before doing more tests to determine the exact problem. The Pasteur Institute is known for its treatment of AIDS and the use of the experimental drug HPA-23 in treating the disease. 23 American AIDS victims have been treated there with mixed results. The drug is currently not available in the United States, although clinical tests are scheduled to begin soon. Dr. Neil Schramm, who heads the City of Los Angeles AIDS Task Force, said the results are inconclusive so far.
The virus has disappeared from the blood for some of those patients, but it has disappeared primarily only as long as the treatment was in effect. Once the treatment was completed, for the most part, the virus did come back in the blood.
Since AIDS is primarily a disease associated with homosexuals, talk of Hudson's lifestyle has surfaced. Hollywood columnist Rona Barrett.
No time did Rock Hudson ever flaunt his alleged homosexuality in front of anyone. Whatever he did in the private confines of his home or elsewhere. He never went out in public, and he never behaved in a manner that caused anyone to possibly discuss his sexual preference.
Hudson, in becoming the first celebrity to have a publicly acknowledged case of AIDS, has brought a new round of attention to the fatal disease, and members of AIDS groups are hoping that this will help in the race to develop a cure and make other potential victims aware of ways of avoiding it. Don Lennox, CNN.
So much is still unknown about the deadly disease AIDS. Tonight, we want to answer some of your questions about it.
Joining us in our Los Angeles bureau is Bill Misenhimer. He's the executive director of the AIDS Project LA, the largest support group for AIDS victims and their loved ones in the Los Angeles area. This group provides numerous support services. Mr. Misenhimer, excuse me, sir. Thank you for joining us. I wonder if you could tell me first, sir, there's been a lot of myth, a lot of misunderstanding about AIDS. Do you think the fact that Rock Hudson has AIDS, is that going to help public awareness now?
I think it probably will. I think, first of all, it will do two things. It will get, hopefully, the entertainment community to realize that, in fact, they have now one of their own who has been diagnosed with the disease, and hopefully they will come out to support it even more. Secondly, we would hope that people across the country would take note and perhaps stimulate their interest to find out more about the disease.
What are the risks for people, not only homosexuals, but heterosexuals, IV patients, dental hygienists? How can they protect themselves?
Well, I think the first thing we need to say is that certainly not everyone in the country is at risk. The people that seem to be at highest risk are the people who are sexually active with multiple partners. Beyond that, you need to look at IV drug users who share needles that may or may not be contaminated. The third thing is the blood supply at this point is probably pretty safe. It's certainly much, much safer than it ever has been due to the screening, the antibody screening test that we currently have. So in terms of dental care, one thing that we may advise people is that they should check with their dentist to make sure that he or she follows the same guidelines they would follow for hepatitis B.
Effort going on to aid with research in fighting the disease, and if so, can you tell us something about that?
In terms of research that's going on now? Most of the research that's going on today is they're looking at three areas. They're looking at, one, treatment therapies to actually cure the disease. They're looking at ways to develop a vaccine, which most researchers in the country say will be a mammoth task if at all possible. And thirdly, they're looking at ways to study the epidemiology and the history of the disease to find out a lot more about how it progresses during its course.
Mr. Misenhimer, do you think enough is being done? And if not, does it lie with the federal government to do more?
I think enough has not been done in the past. I would have to question whether enough is being done now. This disease has been around for about 4 years. People are very slow in reacting to it in terms of coming to support the issue of research. I feel that that is unfortunately due to the fact that it has hit mainly two groups of people who people don't seem to be particularly caring of, and that is sexually active homosexuals as well as intravenous drug users. And I feel that that has been a main reason that research has been slower than it should have been.
What about, isn't there sort of a forgotten group of people who sort of have less severe symptoms, who actually have AIDS but in a less severe form? As I understand it, there are some other stages. And what about that whole group of people? What becomes of them? It's
interesting. There are probably 10 or 20 people with a phase of the disease called AIDS-related complex for every one diagnosed case. Those people suffer symptoms that range from very mild to very severe, in fact as severe as a full diagnosed case of AIDS. Those people are not given the same treatment by the federal government that the people with AIDS are. I mean, they're not eligible for Social Security or supplemental income because they merely do not have the diagnosis. The Centers for Disease Control diagnosis requirements are relatively strict, and a person with AIDS-related complex who may or may not develop a full-blown case is sort of left in limbo, and they don't get the same care and treatment that people with AIDS do.
Mr. Misenhimer, could you explain for us how the disease is transmitted?
Certainly. The two main methods of transmission are the intimate exchange of body fluids from one person to another. The second main method of transmission is through exposure to contaminated blood or blood products. Those are the two main routes of transmission.
All right, the Federal Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta says that as of Monday, AIDS has struck 11,871 Americans, killing half of them. Your group, AIDS Project LA, is a support group. What can you do for these people and for their families? When the death rate is that high, what can be done?
Well, it's very difficult at best. We provide support services. People with AIDS seem to experience extreme social injustices and extreme discrimination. What we try to do is make their lives as normal as possible and as dignified as possible. We help them with all sorts of things, from counseling for themselves, their families, simple basic human needs such as food, shelter, transportation, dental care, in-home daycare for people that have nowhere to go or no one to take care of them. One of the common things we see at the AIDS Project is not only extreme discrimination, but rejection and abandonment by family and friends. So we try to do what we can to fill the voids of people with AIDS who are diagnosed. And I must say, not everyone experiences those kinds of mistreatment. However, many of them do. In fact, I would say a majority of the people do.
What's the life expectancy for an AIDS victim?
I think right now it depends upon what opportunistic infections you're diagnosed with. The average, if you wanted to look at an average, of someone who has two of the main opportunistic infections, which are pneumocystis pneumonia and Kaposi's sarcoma, which is a form of cancer, is about 18 months. There are people, however, who have been diagnosed with AIDS, with Kaposi's sarcoma, and they have, in fact, since been diagnosed as no evidence of disease. Those people are very few. We have 5 in LA that I know of out of 1,000. But what I'm trying to say is it's not totally fatal.
We're talking with Bill Misenhimer, the Executive Director of the AIDS Project LA, and we'll be back to take your phone calls in a minute.
He is the Executive Director of the AIDS Project in Los Angeles. We're going to open our phone lines right now and take the first caller. First caller, where are you calling from and what is your question?
I'm calling from Austin, Texas. My question is, how do you get the majority of the community to support those people who do have AIDS? How can you get them to back the programs against AIDS?
That's a good question. Mr. Misenhimer, can you tell us about the educational efforts going on?
Sure, I can. I think one of the ways that you get people to support it is, unfortunately, my experience is that people will come out and support the disease when they have or know someone who has been personally affected. It seems to be that seems to hold true in a lot of cases. The things we try to do in terms of education is to go out and let people know what is really happening in terms of what's happening to the people with AIDS, as well as what may happen in the future. That's a very difficult job to do. We must do it, though, to convince people that they really need to get involved. Unfortunately, as in any other disease, health education is a very difficult issue, and it often takes people knowing someone before they will actually get involved and support it.
Isn't one of the problems, sir, because of 73% of the victims are gay or bisexual, and there's such a negative impact of homosexuality in some parts of this country?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a problem. I think it's been obvious to us since the beginning that the lack of response to this disease has been because of the groups that have been the hardest hit. I mean, homosexuals and IV drug users are not particularly popular in the general society in this country. And I think one of the critical things to say is that the moral judgments that get in the way of people's ability to see that this is going to be a real problem is to the detriment of everyone, because not only are homosexuals and IV drug users being affected, we're seeing a lot of other people certainly be affected. And as long as people think it's restricted to two groups, they're denying the possibility for them to get it, and unfortunately some people are going to get it and die thinking they were never at risk.
Okay, our next caller, where are you from, and your question, please?
I'm calling from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'd like for him to update us a little bit on this blood
Could you
test.
speak up, please? We're having trouble hearing it.
Okay, I'd like for them to update us a little bit on this blood test that they were doing. How accurate is it, and are they running any other test that could be a little bit more accurate?
Okay. The blood test that you're talking about is an antibody screening test. It's an antibody to the HTLV3 virus. It's being used in all the major blood banks today, which hopefully, and in fact, I'm pretty sure will guarantee the safety of the nation's blood supply. The accuracy of the test is, I can't comment exactly on how accurate it is. I don't think any test, any medical test, is 100% accurate. But certainly it's a very high accuracy test for determining whether or not the antibodies are present. Therefore, if the antibodies are present, the blood will be discarded and not used.
We have another caller on the line. Where are you calling from, and what did you want to know?
I'm calling from Alaska, and I'd like to find out, Dr. Schramm said that it's epidemic proportions and that the money is not there. Why isn't the money there? Where can the money come from?
Well, it certainly is epidemic proportions. Again, I have to go back to the fact that the disease has affected groups of people who don't have a lot of empathy within this country. I think the politicians themselves originally began to think the disease would only stay within those groups and not spread. Unfortunately, the disease has begun to spread, and it was told to them a long time ago that it would. And that is the obvious reason to me why the money hasn't come quicker. In terms of how we can get it there quicker, one of the realities is that, first of all, everyone needs to let people know how they feel. If they're concerned about the disease, believe me, you writing to your elected politician will, in fact, make a difference.
Next caller, where are you calling from, and what is your question?
Bloomington, Indiana. Yes, I was wondering, Mr. Misenhimer, if you can tell me what are the beginning symptoms of AIDS? Is there any way to know if you have AIDS before going to the doctor for some sort of a normal checkup of any kind?
Well, there's no real way of knowing if you have AIDS, and the symptoms can take so many courses that it's almost impossible to even guess until you're actually put through a barrage of tests. First of all, there is no blood test for AIDS. There is no way they can tell you, yes, you have AIDS. They can tell you if you've been exposed. The symptoms that are mainly associated with a case of AIDS that's diagnosable are symptoms that persist for unexplained reasons. For example, if you have unexplained fatigue, diarrhea, night sweats, swollen glands, a dry cough, any of those things that are not explained by other illnesses and are, in fact, don't go away, those are things that might indicate that the immune system is not functioning properly.
Despite the public fear of contagion, it is, in fact, though, a difficult disease to get, is it not?
Yes, it is. It's not highly contagious. One of the main things we need to let people know is that you do not get AIDS from being in a room with people. You do not get AIDS from being in a swimming pool with them, in a jacuzzi, sharing a household. Tests have been done on several households of hemophiliacs, of people with AIDS. Out of 52 people, there were only 2 people within all those households that tested positive for the antibody, and both of those people were sexual spousal partners of the 2 people with AIDS. So that study has been conducted and proven. It's very difficult to get. It's not something that you just get casually.
Okay, our next caller, where are you from? Your question, please.
Calling from Orlando, Florida. My question is very simple. It has to do with the cannabis connection. I was watching C-SPAN about treatment for AIDS, and Dr. James Mason brought up cannabis in that connection. I was wondering what your group has to say to support AIDS victims about their use of cannabis.
Well, what we do is we advise all people, not just people with AIDS, that if you want to keep your immune system intact, that you should avoid all drugs. I'm not familiar with the research on marijuana, but I do know that anything that would suppress your immune system is certainly not going to do anyone any good, particularly people with AIDS. And in terms of how we advise people, we suggest that they do just that. And in general, they do all the things that are advised to you to stay healthy for all reasons, such as getting enough rest, exercise, eat nutritionally, etc.
You say that AIDS is not casually contacted, but there is also some concern amongst a lot of people who perhaps are not sexually active with multiple partners, perhaps do have one lover, let's say, for 2 years or 5 years or whatever, but that just happens to be someone who's carrying the virus. I mean, a lot of people out there are afraid.
It's true. I personally, I take some hotline calls occasionally just to stay in touch with what's going on. I have talked to a lot of women who tell me that they don't know anything about AIDS, but they want to find out. And in conversations with them, they will admit at the end of the conversation that they have had a lover who was a hemophiliac, or they had a lover who confessed to using IV drugs. It's unfortunate, but what we need to do is get out and educate the masses about the people to be careful.
What I'm saying is there might be more people at risk than just the high-risk group.
Absolutely. It is not just gay men and IV drug users. It's sexual partners of any member in a high-risk group, which includes hemophiliacs, IV drug users, and anyone with a transfusion within the past 5 years.
All right, we have another caller on the line. Your question, please, and where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Sarasota, Florida. I'm concerned, is this a high-risk area for AIDS? I'm a homosexual male.
Sarasota?
Yes.
I think any sexually active gay man should be very, very concerned and reduce the risk of his contracting AIDS. I don't think AIDS has struck in practically every city in the country. I think you cannot say that Sarasota is high risk or not. I think if you're a sexually active gay man, you should be very, very careful and protect yourself, and call one of your local hotlines and find out the information.
Next caller, where are you calling from and what is your question?
Miami, and I work for an airline, and if we have an AIDS passenger on board and he urinates or we have to pick up any of his food products that he's eaten from with the saliva, can we be exposed to it? And also, if we are and we have to clean it up, what proper procedure should we take?
I'm sorry, are you saying that he urinated in the restroom?
No, in the seat.
In the seat? And he did what on the utensils?
Seat.
He left food, I think.
He urinated on the passenger seat, and also when you feed a passenger, you have to pick up the food products sometimes, with your hand. If you have a cut on your hand, you pick it up, and from his eating utensils or whatever, a glass?
No. No, the answer is no. If you want to know the proper precautions to take care of bodily spills, the normal way to do it is to use household bleach and dilute it 10% with 90% water. That will kill practically any virus and definitely kills this one. If you're talking about touching a plate or utensils that someone with AIDS has used, there's absolutely no risk. And if you want to know about how to clean dishes that a person with AIDS has eaten off of, all you need to do is wash them in a regular dishwasher on a hot cycle. The thing to do about clothing, if clothing has been soiled, again, wash it, and I would suggest you use gloves, latex gloves, wash it in a regular washer with 10% Clorox solution.
Okay, let's take our next caller. Where are you from? And your question, please. Hello?
Yes, this is Hawaii.
Go ahead, please.
I didn't understand the question, contact through body fluids. Would that include kissing or mucous membrane tissues?
Okay, the body fluids that are mainly suspect are body fluids that you would normally contract or engage when you're engaging in sex. If you look at saliva, saliva is not suspected as a method of transmission. There have been tests done for quite some time now, and to date it has not been proven that saliva is. If it were casually contagious through saliva, the epidemiology and the history of the disease would be totally different. Therefore, we must assume, and again we're proving through testing right now, that AIDS is not contagious through saliva. If you're looking at being the sex partner of someone and have repetitive, intimate, passionate kissing with a massive amount of saliva exchange, it's possible, but it would take that kind of intense exchange to even perhaps do it.
We have another caller on the line. Your question, please, and where are you calling from?
Calling from New York City. I have a friend who succumbed to AIDS, and prior to his death, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, he had experiences with a couple of diseases. He had meningitis, hepatitis, and a couple of other things. I'd like to know, is this a kind of pattern prior to having AIDS, or do you just automatically wake up one day and have AIDS?
Their cases are all very different. We have seen people who have had a history of infectious diseases such as you're talking about, and in fact, yes, go on to develop the disease. We have also seen people who come to us with absolutely no symptoms, no history of being ill, and automatically someday find Kaposi sarcoma, which is an evidence of AIDS, on their body. So there are just all kinds of patterns. I think your individual body would make the disease progress in different ways.
Some very good answers, good information, and we hope that we have aided tonight, Mr. Misenhimer, with the public awareness that you say we need on this subject. Bill Misenhimer, Executive Director of the AIDS Project in Los Angeles.
We'll be back with more news in just a moment.